Strive and Thrive is a collection of discussions featuring guests from various fields, focused on guiding entrepreneurs in creating businesses that excel in every aspect: people, planet, and profit. Throughout the series, you can join us, Romesh and Mike, as we explore relevant topics with our guests which can help businesses thrive.
Romesh and I met while I was supporting a client transform their business, and I needed finance director support and reached out to him and his team. Since then, we've become good friends who share a passion for business and entrepreneurship. If you like today's discussion, then you want to subscribe to our YouTube and Spotify channels. Hi everyone, and welcome to this edition of Strive and Thrive. So today is a special edition. Strive and Thrive is happy to participate in the 4th edition of Podcasthon. For 1 week, thousands of podcasts, including Strive and Thrive, will highlight a charity of their choice. And today we've chosen SafeLives, and we welcome Nikki Kelly to the discussion. So thank you for joining us, Nikki.
Thank you for having me.
You're absolutely welcome. So why did we choose SafeLives? Well, personally, I've had the opportunity to work in violence against women and girls, RASO, domestic abuse cases, supporting the really immensely important subject in the Home Office and with charities, assessing how system change, technologies, AI, new solutions can help voice of the victim and overall improve the whole process nationally. And I think the role that SafeLives play is really important, and I'm really pleased that we're having this as the discussion today. But first, before we move on to that, what I'd like to also introduce is Nikki, who I met while working with SafeLives, where we were looking at digital technologies and how that can improve domestic abuse. But I've particularly found Nikki inspiring. Her approach, her career has been absolutely fascinating, and we'll go through that as part of this discussion. And I thought she'd make both a fascinating guest and also with SafeLives such an important topic. So thanks for joining us, Nikki. And we'd love, if possible, for you to give us a 1-minute overview of your career, which I know has been immensely interesting.
Thank you. Well, I'm currently the head of practice at SafeLives, but my background's really been in community development, building community resilience and supporting self-advocacy and advocacy within communities, but also with individuals.
Amazing. Thanks, and Nikki, what were you doing before that?
Well, before before that, this has probably been 30 years of my life within the third sector, working with a range of different organisations. But I originally started kind of in the more corporate sector and sales, actually, and then decided to come across into the education sector and start to looking to apply my skills and the things that interested me in a different way. And some of that came from personal experience, I think, and I'm starting to get an understanding of the role advocacy can play when you kind of go through situations in your own life or that of your family. And you can start to see what becomes kind of a passion for you, I guess, and where you think you can add your skills and experience.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. And welcome again to the podcast. It's lovely to see you.
Thank you.
So I love that you've taken the skills from the early part of your career and you're using those skills and building upon them to pursue these areas that you're extremely passionate about and that have impacted you personally in the past. So that's amazing. So can you please tell us a little bit more about SafeLives, its purpose and your role within the organisation and what you're aiming to achieve?
Yeah, absolutely. So SafeLives is a national domestic violence charity, and our strategy really has now become about the whole picture. So really taking a systems view in how we work towards ending domestic abuse for everyone and really working with families. So our vision is to really have a society that can prevent harm, reduce risk and support recovery So every adult and child that's affected by domestic abuse can live a life that's safe and that they have the freedom that they deserve. And really, I think the exciting thing about our new strategy is our kind of approach to finding what works and helping it happen.
Okay, amazing. So you've talked about a systems approach. So forgive me for asking a silly question, I suppose. But so, what does that mean, and how does that differ to other organisations that are supporting in your space?
We're a second-tier charity, so we're not directly working on the front line, but we do produce advice and provide information and guidance to frontline organisations. And we listen and we analyse and we innovate within that. So everything that we do is grounded in voice and voice data and practice. Taking a systems lens has really kind of come from just before I joined the organisation, where SafeLives developed the public health approach, which was a systems methodology, if you like, a series of steps working alongside local areas to help them improve their response to domestic abuse, but really meeting them where they are and understanding what they needed to achieve. And that really came from areas telling us that they wanted to understand their own population, understand their system, and look at the barriers and what could enable them to be able to be more effective. So the public health approach has now worked with over 58 local authority areas or DA partnership boards across the country, and that's what my team lead on. And that has now led into what does good look like, because it's a consistent question that, well, what does good look like in a domestic abuse system at a local level? And so now we've developed the whole picture framework, which is we're just piloting in 3 local areas, which is really focused on a more of a self-assessment process based on evidence, evidence-based practice, all the research, and what we've seen in terms of our recommendations across the 58 local authority areas that we've worked with.
Okay.
So it's quite exciting times.
Yeah, definitely. So if I'm to break that down, the first line organisations are dealing with the victims.
Yes.
Yeah, kind of directly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Okay. And what you're doing is looking at the systems and processes which they use, and you're trying to make those more efficient and better so that the victims are supported more effectively. Is that a fair way to describe it?
A little bit more of that than that. If we go and work alongside a local area doing a whole picture or the public health approach response, we would be working with them for about 6 to 9 months. So they'd have an experienced practitioner from my team that would come from the organisation that would come and do that walk with them. So we would be doing a lot of analysis, policies and procedures, as you talked to, Romesh, but also interviewing victims and survivors, speaking to professionals, pulling together lots of different data in terms of the prevalence of domestic abuse, understanding the local strategy, a whole series of things, and then working with the local area to understand what it needs to do and from the recommendations that we would make. So we hold workshop days at the end of our process with them, which also brings together people with lived experience of domestic abuse, our pioneers, our pioneers are from our Authentic Voice team, and they are people with lived experience that kindly and bravely offer to share their experience to help other people that may be going through the same situations as them. And so it's a real collaborative approach that really needs to kind of build trust, to really understand, to look at the culture and what sits beneath really the data and the reports. We go and do observations. So we'll go and observe their MARECs and other, their multi-agency risk assessment conferences. Sorry for I get into abbreviations. So yes, it's a really collaborative approach, and it's really trying to understand and to work with a local system, and every local system is different. And it's really important to appreciate that. That could be for lots of reasons. It could be a rural area, it could be an urban area. There's lots of different in terms of community and what is provided and the services that are required. So can be very variable.
No, amazing. So you're really trying to get a deep understanding of what's going on. Getting data is a very powerful thing to do in that sense, isn't it? So,
Nikki, can I ask a question? Can you? I'm an advocate of sort of systems level approach, especially in these complex sort of problems, which is why I'm really interested in what SafeLives do. Can you give some examples of why a systems approach is really important in the domestic abuse landscape?
Well, I think
can you give examples, I guess?
Well, within domestic abuse, obviously people can be, if you kind of think about your own life, you're impacted by so many different factors, aren't you? Maybe with the health service, housing, it could be to do with your job and your employment. It could be that you're in, receipt of benefits. So there's a whole around you as a person, there's an awful lot of intersectionality with that. And there's an awful lot of different resources that you may be using. So that one person not needing to repeat their story 50 times, which is what we're often told, to different organisations and to different key organisations within a local system, being able to work as a system and to work collaboratively together, especially since the Domestic Abuse Act came in 2021, with the need for creating a strategy and then a needs assessment and understanding how that's going to be applied within a local area. A systems approach is really important, especially when we think about information sharing, agreements, when we think about risk, particularly those victims that may be highest risk of, murder or serious harm. Being able to work as a system is really, really important to give the best experience to those people who are experiencing harm.
I like that example, Nikki, of just getting someone to tell their story once, because I imagine it's quite a difficult experience as well to do that, isn't it? But the efficiencies of being able to spread that message, effectively is great. So you sent some interesting statistics on the prevalency of domestic abuse. Can you tell me, can you give us some highlights just to underpin how common it is in society?
Well, if you kind of think about 1 in 4 people in the UK experience domestic abuse, and that up to March 2025, approximately 3.8 million people in that year experienced domestic abuse, but also thinking that 75,000 people approximately were at the highest risk of harm or murder. That gives you some quite startling statistics of what an impact domestic abuse has. And I think that, it's always important to remember that there's no them and us. So domestic abuse can happen to anybody, anywhere, at any time.
I think one of the most interesting statistics that you sent me, Nikki, in advance, and I was aware of in previous conversations, about how long it can take a victim of domestic abuse to come forward, and they say it's sort of 2.5 years, or those numbers you sent me, it can take a victim to come forward before they're ready to talk to someone. And often even at that point it can take them 5 to 7 times of going out and discussing it and the challenges of actually getting out of that ecosystem. I think it's phenomenal, the scale that we're talking about here and the kind of impact and the touch points therefore that the system has on those individuals over the course of what is a very long time period.
Absolutely. And that could be that, and as we know, that people don't present, it could be health is still where most people of experiencing domestic abuse will be going first, but it might not be that you're presenting in terms of actually being able to share your domestic abuse experience. You could be going with an injury into A&E. It could be a million different reasons by which you're engaging with the system. It could be that you're pregnant and you're going into a maternity unit. It could be that you're going to speak to your GP. So but I think when you think about the impact of sharing your experience of domestic abuse, could mean that, the barriers then, or the risks that someone might perceive with, may my children be taken away from me, I might lose my home. Could it mean that I have to move house and then completely lose my support system? How am I going to be viewed? If you're a professional and you may be working in a local system, how do you then report something to colleagues that you might be working with? And what if your partner kind of shares a mortgage with you, or is on the deeds of a house, or shares a lease, or is, with both you and benefits? There's so many complications and reasons, to that, to trying to understand why people don't report abuse, but also because people don't always understand that they're in a domestic abuse situation. We don't go into a relationship, for example, do we, thinking, this is domestic abuse. It starts with love, doesn't it? That's the starting point, and where you may start a family, and that's not often talked about. But there's also a grieving process that then happens as well as fear and risk. So I think it is a really complicated picture, but also that recovery isn't always immediate either. So when we talk to, preventing harm, reducing risk, and supporting recovery may take many years, because it could be that person is in a, flight or fight situation, in terms of their own well-being and protecting their family and thinking about their immediate future. To actually recover from that may take many years, when they've actually got the time and space, if they've got the time and space, to be able to think about their own recovery. So, and also we know that older victims of domestic abuse may take even longer to report. So that may take anywhere up to 6 years to report. And that's also because perhaps of culture in which, different generations have grown up in, perhaps kind of not feeling that at that point in your life. So there's a whole host of different things that play into how and where people report domestic abuse.
Yeah, it's a very complex area, isn't it? And I understand there are many different forms of domestic abuse. Would you mind taking us through those?
Yeah, of course. So physical, obviously in terms of physical injury, emotional abuse, financial abuse, coercive control, which we really are starting to understand an awful lot more about now, and there's an awful lot more training available. Sexual abuse, tech abuse now has become more and more prevalent with, the amount of time that people spend online. Harassment and stalking, and honour-based violence. So, that list, if you like, also continues to grow with the way that, I guess more so in terms of thinking about online and the way that tech is advancing. In fact, I heard a new article online today. So it continues to grow, but that's an example of some of the most typical types of abuse that we tend to see.
Yeah, gosh, it's you've really brought home how significant this issue is. What would you say are the biggest achievements today?
Wow, that's a big
area?
question.
Yeah.
That's a big question. I think,
or maybe give us a few of the things that you feel you've areas you've been able to help.
I think from a SafeLives point of view, and I wasn't here when all of this was originally set up, but the setup of the multi-agency risk assessment conferences, there are now in approximately 290 of those across the country. And most of those tend to report their data into SafeLives. So it also enables us to have a real picture and provides insights and information on what is happening nationally, but also locally in terms of those victims that are at highest risk experiencing domestic abuse. I also think the through the different stages of SafeLives from when they've piloted. One of the things I love about working here is the innovative approach and the test and learns and the piloting that happens, working really collaboratively with other organisations. So the public health approach, I think, which has come from open door and beacon sites and testings kind of in, I think, around 2010, 11 onwards up to when we kind of launched this. I think that's a huge success in terms of taking a systems methodology and working with local partners. And then our leading lights accreditation. So we've got an accreditation system for local organisations that want to kind of benchmark themselves against a set of quality standards, but also our training and our research. So our training team have trained, I think it is virtually all of the police forces across the UK in DA matters. So I think that's also a huge achievement. And our research team really bring that, the ethics behind the work that we do, that kind of ethical research, and being able to really produce that kind of academic side to what we do, and being able to kind of really do the deep dives. But I think at the heart of all of it is our authentic voice. So really working with those people with lived experience and creating, our pioneers. So being able to have that network of people with lived experience that really, and our change makers, which is young people who've experienced domestic abuse, that work with us really and are our guiding lights and at the heart of everything we do and keep it real. And I think that's really, really important.
Do you think there's increased awareness right now on this subject, even if I know we're struggling on the implementation? Do you think the awareness of domestic abuse is becoming more and more common now in terms of a narrative nationally? And do you think that must help?
I think so. I think it is talked about. And I know, sort of over COVID, I wasn't here at SafeLives then, but there was a big reach in campaign. And I do think, that there is obviously, as we know, kind of issues around kind of thinking about social media and those types of things. But at the same time, it's a massive opportunity. And to kind of provide campaigns. We're coming up to International Women's Day. There's various campaigns that run throughout the year. So there's also lots of information, training and education. So even in terms of schools. So yes, I do think there is greater awareness. And you would hope with also greater awareness becomes greater reporting, which also feeds into our understanding more of the data that we collect. But I also think that complexity of need has also increased as well. So we often can see that, as we live longer as a population, and what that might mean too in terms of the complexity that comes into domestic abuse is also a factor.
Brilliant. And what do you think of some of the, picking up on the sort of healthcare employees and social care employees and educational employees, what do you think? They're not naturally not considering the needs of individuals of domestic abuse. It's the system which they operate within that's causing the constraints. What are some of the challenges some of the individuals and employees of these organisations are having to be able to take forward the lived experience for domestic abuse victims?
I think practitioners are, people go into those roles for a reason, don't they? And I think we're, incredibly grateful that they are there. But I think I think some of the challenges that they face are sheer capacity. That's kind of, what we see that comes through. Also, a high, as we know, that's happening, particularly in the health and wellbeing sector, is a turnover of staff. So high turnover, then that obviously has an impact in terms of training. And we also obviously see kind of that run over from COVID, where perhaps there were an awful lot of things that were remotely delivered rather than kind of in person and in practice. So being able to come, and obviously funding is always a challenge, isn't it? And being able to do the things that we would like to do, we're not able to do simply because we just don't have that kind of funding envelope to do that. But I think a systems approach also helps us to then help practitioners provide consistency that they would like to provide to the people that they're supporting. And there's also remembering there's lots of people out there experiencing domestic abuse that don't come into contact with any professionals because they choose not to, and or not engage with the system and not engage with the local organisation. And it's also important to us to be able to talk to those people about their experience and to understand where and how they would like to access help. And I think that's also changing, isn't it, in terms of technology and what you may be able to receive in your hand on your phone. And kind of when we talk, as health does, to self-enablement and to be able to talk to self-advocacy. And I think, probably in the future, we will see an awful lot more of that. There are a lot of brilliant apps out there now for supporting domestic abuse victims and survivors as well. So I think that kind of choice that people will have will also continue to grow and evolve as technology kind of comes into the victim, the victim space, I guess, for victims and survivors.
I know you and I have talked about how technology might play into this space, but what's your view on how technology can really help the system changes that you're looking at through SafeLives? What are some of the examples you're thinking about in terms of technology change?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting time as we see technology come into the VOG sector. I think technology can help to kind of where systems perhaps have become stuck, and thinking about kind of bringing down some of those solutions to where a system may be, more traditional institutions may struggle to understand what to do in those spaces. Technology can help us to kind of co-design some of those services, but bringing in cross-sector talent, because also I guess in terms of my career, that's always been something that I've been passionate about, is that kind of cross-sector approach. But also kind of, that ease of use, how you can speed up some of the systems and processes that we use. Technology can kind of help with that, perhaps providing earlier insights as well, because of being able to provide that. So, fewer missed opportunities so that we can help to keep people safer earlier in a process. And maybe using tools that can kind of surface different insights from quite complex data sets that would otherwise perhaps remain hidden. I think these are all important factors that technology can play. And at SafeLives, we're quite keen that we digitalise what we're doing. So with the whole picture framework, we would really like then that to go onto a digital platform so that we can link up into live data sets. And start to kind of really think about those real-time dashboards.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've seen some technology. It's about engaging with the right individuals, with the right means with which they want to communicate, isn't it? The multimodal type of communication. Some people prefer a chatbot. Some people want to talk to people. Some people want phone engagement. It's what is appropriate for those people, and having multimodal channels to really be able to engage with people in the right way. And what would be suitable for a student would be very different to an elderly population. And how can we surface those kind of insights? The other ones I've seen that are sort of really interesting in this space is, you talked about coercion, particularly coercion online, and being able to understand how people are using online forums for coercive based behavior, and can those be identified and triggered. And I think there are technology opportunities in here. I think
it's great to use technology to combat the kind of difficulties that technology is creating in this area, isn't it?
Yes, I think so. And I think that kind of, also kind of thinking about the innovation that happens in technology and how we've talked about workforce, but how it can support the workforce as well, thinking about, types of learning, digital reflection sessions, also thinking about how it can enhance but not undermine victim and survivor centered practice. So I think, and that grounded really in safety, equity, and, clear governance structures. I think all of that I think it can also really where, for practitioners, it can also and for victims and survivors, can help to reduce that duplication. When we're kind of thinking, as we talked about, not sharing your story, 10, 15, 20 times, but also, and strengthening transparency. So I think it's got quite a lot of, it's got a real role to play. And it's been certainly over this last few months, great for us to be able to explore some of that within the organisation as well.
Can I move us on to your career, Nikki, and how you've got into this space? Because you've got an absolutely fascinating career where you've worked in advocacy across multiple domains, ranging from sport to education, supporting people on their entrepreneurial journeys. What motivates you, and what has incentivized you to do this?
I think that's a really interesting question, because I've often sat and thought about this myself. I think for me, if I really kind of look at the root of what's important to me, it is advocacy and self-advocacy. And that has taken my career in lots of different directions. And and also then people, ordinary people in places being able to do extraordinary things, having those opportunities and those platforms to be able to do that. So whether that's been working, with organisations that support people who are homeless, and being able to spend time with amazing professionals and amazing people that took part in the biggest charity flower show garden ever. It was 500 people who were ex-offenders or homeless. And I spent some time going around the country, understanding what that experience had meant to the people that had taken part, and to see that kind of evolution into perhaps where people were then setting up small local businesses, growing in the homeless hostels, or what was happening within the prisons. That kind of inspiration, but also down to thinking about how do we provide and working cross-sector with innovation to be able to provide individuals with the platform to unleash that potential. And I think that for me is at the heart of all of my work, and also the reason I came to SafeLives.
Okay, so can you tell us a little bit about your experiences at Tottenham Hotspur Football Club? You've done some great things there, I understand.
Yeah, I was fortunate to kind of have a journey, I guess, in terms of working with sport through the organisations that I was working with, and originally worked with some of the football clubs across the Southwest, with a range of different partners, on creating a programme that taught people who were homeless computer skills, but within a football club setting. And that kind of went to London and working with London football clubs. And then I ended up working at Tottenham as part of the regeneration scheme, and kind of my remit was employment and skills within the regeneration programme that was underway there with the new stadium. And so kind of from the off, there was a need to kind of create those opportunities for local people. So we started working with the local council, created an employment and skills partnership, and then started to think about how you can use sport as a universal language, really, to engage with people. So we kind of set up job fairs with over 1,000 people coming through the door, 150 employers, and we worked with the local stadium hospitality partners and created kiosks where people could come and volunteer on match day and have that match day experience, but also learn new skills and link them into the jobs that were coming through. And we created a program, again, working with providers around traineeships where young people could come and learn as part of what it meant to work out in the community with a sports foundation, as well as then be able to kind of earn, their English, maths and different qualifications that they might need. And it culminated in the development of an employment and skills hub on the blueprint of the stadium, where people could come in and they receive mentoring support, employment support, education support. And it kind of all round, really, it was an incredibly successful program of work. And we ended up being able to become a kind of part of a supply chain, really, for quite a number of employers, which was an amazing thing to be able to achieve, as well as obviously all of the construction that was going on the site and being able to link people into those construction roles.
What was your learning from that? Yeah, what was your learning from that? What was your learning from that? It's such a good example, but obviously it's novel. And what was your learning, that these individuals needed to be given the opportunities to contribute to something like that? What's your insight?
I think my insight from that time was really that, firstly, you kind of need to create the energy between, what is it we all want to achieve from a big regeneration project like that. And also, what is it the employers are looking for? And what is it that the young people or adults, what skills have they got, and how do we promote those skills to the employer in the best possible way? Often, we know, don't we, that there can be online systems. Sometimes those things may not be accessible for people. So we started to break down the recruitment pathway and directly put the person who is applying for the job in front of the employer. So for one particular hospitality jobs fair, I think there was about 2,136. It's quite scary that I can remember that number after all these years. Job opportunities, and over 150 employers, I think. But the success of that was because you kind of had that direct contact.
Okay. Can I, for me, what I think you've really achieved there is you're drawing people in to events, to educational forums that wouldn't otherwise go. You're using the power of the sport to draw them in, essentially. So you're capturing a wider audience, and that's very powerful, actually. And I guess the engagement is increased as a result, right?
I think it's also. I'm so sorry.
I
think it's also where it is. So it's not a job centre and it's not a council building. It's opening up a football club, and also having the experience of, perhaps the club support by bringing a player along, and having and for the employer, it's kind of also, you've got great brand association. You're also coming to a wonderful place. Doesn't matter who you support. Not everyone supports the same club when they come along to an event like that. But it's about the all-round holistic experience that you're providing, and and valuing people and what they bring. And I think that that's why that model was so successful and has continued to grow and develop, and that's wonderful to see. But you also want the tracking mechanism of what difference did it actually make afterwards for that person, for that employer. What do we need to continue to do more of, and what do we need to do less of? So when we kind of were trying to recruit the first 250 jobs, we broke that down into workshops that were held in the stadium, working with all the skills in the local area that we had, you know, whether it was from the council and their employment and skills team or a local provider, and saw people right there and then within I think it was about 6 to 12 weeks, we'd recruited all 250 jobs. But you can also apply that to, you know, all of the kind of football foundations across the country do amazing work and run huge schemes out in communities. And we had a health coach that went out and did 2,000 health checks in a local supermarket and in a tracksuit. And I think it is breaking down the barriers in whatever way you can to be able to speak to people and to work with the local community.
The interesting thing for me is that you're talking about breaking down the existing systems, right? The systems of recruitment, the systems of healthcare, because actually they're creating blockers for what would be appropriate recruitment. You know, traditional models of online recruitment forums would straight away limit the opportunity for those people you're trying to attract into these jobs. And which ties in with, actually, ironically, what you're talking about with SafeLives as well. That system level change is required. Break down those barriers that are in place at the moment and create that environment where different things can happen and give the experiences of those individuals, or the opportunities for those people to get access to what they deserve access to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also you can also start to think then as a system, for example, if you know, in any big regeneration scheme, for example, okay, we know that we're going to have 5,000 construction jobs, for example. What kind of qualifications, skills, or, you know, CSCS cards or whatever it might be, are we going to need? And how can we work with the local system of providers, Department for Work and Pensions? I mean, you know, when we worked, we took our model at Tottenham to Wembley as well, when Tottenham went to Wembley, and applied it there as well, and worked with Brent Council and the local job centres. And I think for me, being able to really work together collaboratively, remove as many barriers as we possibly can for all of us, and trying to understand it's also not always about funding, because funding always comes up. But if we always think about the money, this is my personal view, if we always think about the money, then we're never going to get anything done, because it's really about how can we unpick some of that, and what have we already got. You know, I think also you're kind of thinking about mentors in the very, or like, for example, in a football scenario, all the coaches that are out there working with, you know, local young people and doing incredible jobs, and the skills that they all have that go way beyond football skills. It's much, you know, they are also kind of models of in their own communities of what they've achieved. And I think employing all of that together and creating, like you said, Mike, a kind of a rounded offer that becomes experiential, you know, because we've all had examples in our own lives where you think, oh, I'd never go back and do that again, you know, or there's no way I'm going to go back into that room. So being able to kind of remove some of that, but also checking in. I mean, there's important people that I can think of throughout my career, because after my working in football, I went into creating a community-based social prescribing service. I was fortunate enough to work with a group of very innovative GPs who wanted to do it differently. Is that those check-ins with those community leaders and those local community influencers that are there day in, day out, who know their community incredibly well, who have worked tirelessly for years to achieve what they've achieved and to connect people together. And I quite often like to go for like a coffee and say, well, how do we think we're doing then? You know, are we doing this well, or are we not? You know, what do you think we need to do more of? And I always call it, when from a social prescribing lens, kind of, they're already the organic social prescribers. They existed long before we came along. And so how do we work with those people to be able to make the difference and the change that we want to make?
Can I spend the last 10 minutes digging into Nikki? Because I think it's your interest and personality that's driven a lot of what you're doing. And I think it's something that I think will be interesting for our audience and for other people who want to work in this space. What is it that drives Nikki, really underpins your interest in such advocacy, I guess, for disadvantaged individuals, or in the case of domestic abuse, people who are in very, very horrible situations? How is it that what's it that motivates you, and how have you become so focused on helping and working in all these fascinating areas?
I just think for me, it's a passion for making a difference. Almost making I'd like to think I'd make myself redundant almost. It's about that self-enablement. It really is about self-enablement and being able to see how that people can see that there is a way to do the things that they want to do in the way that they want to do them, and us being able to provide a platform for them to be able to do that, or a chance to kind of engage with something that's going to help them achieve their goals. And I think whether that's health and well-being, I've been lucky enough to be part of setting up pain cafes in communities which are for chronic pain, led by again another innovative approach to and all of that again is about self-referrals, about supporting self-management, about having a different way to engage with pain, for example. But I think for me, at the heart of everything is how can we support advocacy and self-advocacy.
What would be your recommendation to people who want to work in advocacy-based roles like you have done over your whole career? What advice would you give to these people?
I think my biggest piece of advice would be to listen to start with, to listen and to learn, and to come from an evidence-based practice, to get really kind of into the heart of local communities and understand what community development actually means. And to also then look at all of the various resources. And I mean this, I call them community treasures, because they are in every community, whether that is a community physical asset or whether that's the people that make that community thrive. And I think if you get to know that, and there are of course formal courses that you can do in understanding advocacy kind of more formally, of course there are, but I think for often that we all have skills that we can apply to this. It's a particular form of wanting to be able to support people where they are and how they want to be supported, and then putting that in kind of a community context. So I think, yes, formal learning, maybe find a mentor. I've been incredibly lucky to have mentors that have taken me on this journey. And I've also had leaders. I've been very lucky in my roles with leaders that have given me those and helped to develop those skills, but also provided an innovative environment to be able to achieve that as well.
Can you give me an example of what some of those mentors or innovators have done to help you sort of know on your journey?
Yeah, I think one of them I remember clearly said about being brave enough to jump off the cliff and almost trust that angel wings are going to catch you on the way down. And I think that innovation is often that, isn't it? You have to be brave. So I think that has always stuck with me. But I think often space, and also the leaders have given me, I might have the idea and I think that I know how I would like to implement it. And a leader will give you that space, trust and belief to say, just go and do it then. And I think that that's huge in terms of unleashing potential, whatever your authority level is, or wherever you sit within an organization or even within a community, is how you can do that. And also be in that safe space to also have that blue sky thought leadership thinking that you can go and explore those ideas and take them forward, but also being able then to connect you with the networks. So if you don't have your own networks when you start, how do you start? A leader can do that for you too. So I feel like I've been incredibly fortunate to be put into places and spaces where I can absorb all of that and then think about how I can apply that. So lots of different ways, as well as kind of challenging you, and making you think about yourself, because I also think self-reflection is also.
Have you ever got really frustrated because you've taken on some major challenges as part of your work? You must be banging your head against the walls of systems change, leaders who don't want to change, organisations that don't want to change. Are there points you've gone, and how have you managed to find your way through this to create the kind of change, the social change that you've had an effect on?
I think I'm incredibly optimistic. I do go away and do a lot of self-reflection and think about how can I come at this a different way? What is somebody else's point of view? Like, what is it I'm missing, or what is it that we need to consider? Because everyone's got a different starting point, and everyone's coming to the conversation, aren't they, in a different way, but also they may have different restrictions on their time or their capacity, or, their ability to engage for all sorts of reasons. So I think it's trying to understand what that means, but also, despite the frustration, often everyone we're working with is trying to achieve the same thing in a different way, perhaps. But how can we start to kind of, come from the same place? And I also think we start to go where the energy is as well, or energy comes to you. I always find it's quite surprising. You think, right, I'm a bit stuck, and then suddenly a door will open. You go, oh, wow. Okay, here we go again.
How do you find the spark for this innovation? What sparks that creativity? You've talked about bravery, and that's such a good. You've been empowered by your mentors, haven't you? People who encouraged you to take that leap. But where do you get that spark?
I think it's just something that is in you. If you believe in something that you really want to make a difference, and it's not saying that you have all the answers, is it? It's just saying that you know you want to make a difference, and you want to contribute to that discussion or that conversation, or that you think that you can help to achieve that.
Do you have a process to kind of encourage the little, I suppose, flashes of inspiration?
My sister is an amazing artist. She discovered that when she was 40. She won't like me saying she was 40. But I was never that creative. But I feel like my creativity, I can see the picture of what I think that needs to look like in my head. And so my process really is from that picture backwards, of how am I going to achieve that, and what is it?
You've got the vision.
I've got the vision. Yeah, my director at SafeLives says that I can like to knit clouds together, and I think I said to you, Mike, I would like that as a job title. But I guess in essence, the cloud knitter would be really good. I'd love that. But
you're more of a doer, though, aren't you, Nikki? You are a doer as well. There's definitely a doer in you.
I like to get stuck in and get it done, and operationalize the strategy, really. Yeah. But it's also been able to, of course, meet people like you, and to have the chances to be able to have these kinds of conversations, but also think about how you can apply some of what, the amazing knowledge and the creativity in the sectors you work in into the work that we do. So I always feel lucky that to come into the room, and I go away then, and then I'm more inspired, and I don't sleep all night, and then I'll just bug everyone tomorrow with some more ideas.
So you use your network to keep your energy up, especially when you hit that blockers.
It does, doesn't it? When you think how long we spend at work, I think every day, that it's lovely if you can get to a place where it doesn't feel like work, and it's actually something that you totally believe in. So certainly at SafeLives, I really do. I'm incredibly lucky to be surrounded by brilliant brains, lots of expertise, and to have the opportunities to be kind of able to innovate and develop and do this work. So I'm incredibly grateful for that.
It's interesting, Romesh. I think Nikki's we've been pushing for how she does what she does and what motivates her in the advocate. It resonates a lot with what we're learning on Strive and Thrive about entrepreneurs and their journey and what motivates them. And it's almost a very similar entrepreneurial experience that Nikki's having with the work she's doing. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. What I feel you're doing is you're working hard, but you're working smart. You're using tech to solve problems at scale with the systemized approach. So, when people think of charitable organizations, they think of that, the kind of, the softer skills, should we say, more so. But you're applying deep thinking and science. It's a different approach, but it's really powerful, and you're doing it in a space which we've talked about at the beginning of this episode is so important for our society. 1 in 4, a quarter of our population is impacted by this issue. So I love that you are doing that. I was really curious about the creativity, and you're obviously someone who's a deep thinker, and that's wonderful to hear. And the latter part of the conversation, you work with the football clubs, the community focus. There's real passion in that as well, and you kind of take all of those aspects and use that to drive forwards. And as Mike said, there's a lot of parallels with pure business entrepreneurship, if that makes sense. So it's a really good side by side comparison, and lots of similar skill sets. So very well done to you. And well done to SafeLives. Yeah, it's brilliant.
Yeah, it's real pioneers, and I just think it's very humbling when you listen to people that with lived experience that really are at the heart of kind of driving that change with the organisation as well. I think we're incredibly lucky that people want to do that.
Brent, before I just finalise, what Nikki is your hope now in the next few years with the work SafeLives doing, and what would you like to see happen?
I really would like to think that our whole picture framework can help to drive the change that we want to see in terms of helping to halve domestic abuse in this country, and that we continue to see the positive role that technology can play within that development, and just generally how we can start to see victims and survivors' voice become more and more prevalent in local systems and local systems change, and all the way up through every level, really. I think that would be amazing if we could see that really embedding survivor rights in everything we do.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. Nikki, thank you very, very much for joining us. It's been absolutely great. So that wraps up this special episode as part of our Podcasthon. If you enjoyed it, feel free to visit www.podcasthon.org to discover many other charities through the voices and talents of wider podcasters. Thank you very much for those listening to Strive and Thrive, which is a podcast for entrepreneurs, founders, business leaders and innovators like Nikki. Please follow and subscribe to our YouTube and podcast channels. Thank you very much, Nikki, and thanks everyone.
Thank you for listening to Strive and Thrive.